Looking for ways to get more private pay clients? Thrizer is a payment app that makes out-of-network therapy more accessible.
Thrizer verifies your clients' out-of-network benefits, so when they pay, they are only charged what they actually owe, while you continue to earn your full rate. Check out our special link, join.thrizer.com/modern therapist, and use the code Modern Therapists to activate $2,500 in free payments with Thrizer. We're super excited to partner with Laura Reagan, LCSWC, who created the Trauma Therapist Network, a community providing support and training for relational trauma and attachment therapists.
Check out our special affiliate link, bit.ly/Modern Trauma Therapist Network for more information.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhelm and Katie Vernoy.
Before we get into this episode today, we wanted to share that the content of this episode discusses working with clients who talk about school shootings. The case that is being discussed in this episode has given their permission to share this story with our audience. Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that we go through in our profession, the reactions that we have to clients, and the things that show up in our practices. And this one's maybe a little bit of a vulnerable episode for me because I had an incident that came up in my practice that didn't make the news. Now, generally that would be considered a good thing, but this is really something where trying to help anybody else who might end up in these situations to be able to hopefully not have the same experience that I did. So we're recording this about, 5 or 6 weeks after an incident that had come up with a client of mine. We're going to keep a lot of the details very, very big and distant and appropriate for being able to share here and make this a little bit more about my experience through this, but we'll just say, what happens when you stop a school shooting?
When I hear you ask that question, how do you stop a school shooting? I think of how hard it is to even imagine being in that space, even though I've worked in a lot of high acuity, a lot of teens that were on probation, teens that were in very serious situations. And I know you can't share much, but I think my first question is, how did you get to that assessment? Let's just say you've got a teen in crisis.
Right.
And how did you, well, first off, was this a teen that you expected it of? Like, was this somebody that you were constantly having to do harm to other assessments for?
This was not somebody that I was expecting in this space.
Okay.
And it was surprising to me that it started off with a unplanned session.
Mm-hmm.
A parent in the situation said, "Hey, can we get in today?
Sure.
There's been something that happened and we want to get in." So
okay.
It was originally something where I went through, based on the reaction, I'm doing a suicide assessment first. And
sure,
a lot of the markers were there, and doing just good clinical work and talking through things, the severity as far as immediate crisis response for suicide diminished quite a bit just during our discussion.
And just so folks know, we do have a whole couple of episodes on really good suicide assessment. We'll put a link to those in the show notes. We don't need to go into suicide assessment
right
more than you want to right now.
Right. Despite doing really good clinical work in that moment to take out the immediacy of the suicide assessment, I had asked if there was lingering feelings and wanting to act out against other people. And just as kind of a bridge towards, is there a threat to others piece here? And that became affirmative very quickly.
Okay. So you had a suspicion, you're not going to tell us why, but you had a suspicion that there might be a desire to act out towards others. There was a relational piece to what with a crisis was. And so you asked, Is there some danger to others? You did
Yes.
that assessment because that was present. How often do you think a secondary threat to others assessment is needed once you've completed the suicide assessment?
I don't know. Out of all of the assessments, the risk assessments I've done throughout my career, there was just a piece of this that seemed like that one was necessary. Now, from the legal end of things, you should at least ask. Like,
Sure.
I can say that rationally here outside of the immediacy of the situation. Everyone should ask all of the time. At worst, people are going to say no. I mean, or maybe at best. At best, people are going to say no. There's nothing there.
Nothing wrong with not wanting to hurt other people.
But it's something where it's already just kind of a high alert response sort of situation, and particularly when it's not an expected thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those of you out there who work on crisis management, pet teams, those kinds of response sorts of things, my hat is completely off to you. And knowing going into those situations that, all right, that's probably standard protocol for you, but I have a practice that's not that. I have a practice of well-to-do, high-achieving sorts of people that I'm not out responding in crisis situations a lot.
So, strong suicide assessment. It sounds like there was a bridge to harm to others assessment that you're saying is probably good practice, but the way you're talking about it, it was almost like there was some spidey sense tingling around something else is here, and I need to assess it. Probably good practice, just make sure you're asking the question, but I mean, you're not saying it, but I'll say it. I don't know that I always go there after I get through a suicide assessment and it feels like, okay, the immediacy is not there. And so I think this is a really good reminder for all of us that sometimes, especially in relational situations, but we're relational beings, if someone is, needing an in-depth suicide assessment based on their level of suicidality, homicidality or harm to others is a natural leap, and we should be assessing for it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So back to your story. So the harm to others assessment became affirmative. It sounds like that would have been shocking to you based on just the little bit that you've said about this is not someone that this was a space that you expected them to be in. How did you feel? How did you what were you processing in that moment when there was an affirmative assessment of harm to others?
It was in the moment, just keep the client talking.
Okay.
Just like I went with, there seems to be productive space here. There seems to be productive space to validate feelings. And the more that is able to be expressed, the more that we can get through the immediacy of the feelings to then be able to kind of make a rational, all right, we're through things. We're not in big emotional mind anymore. We can kind of let the pieces fall where they may once we're through the big feelings driving these desires. So initially my thoughts were, okay, this is happening. I'm going to just continue to facilitate feelings here. I'm going to help this kid just talk.
So was the goal processing to try to decrease the dysregulation? Was it trying to get to a certain point or just being in space?
It was just to be able to get through the dysregulation, for the client to feel like there's somebody that understood that this wasn't just kind of, fighting an emotional response with somebody else, but just being able to have somebody in their space that felt like somebody on their side.
When I've been in crisis situations, my internal feeling becomes excruciatingly mindful, very present to the present moment. There is nothing else that exists in the world, and I'm just being in space, and I have a goal. The goal is to be able to finish the session eventually or the conversation eventually and have everybody safe, but it becomes very, very still. That's kind of what I'm picturing. Am I close?
Yeah, you're describing it very well. Yeah.
Okay. So when you're talking, you're very present. There's a harm to others flavor to it. There's a concern. When did you become concerned that this could be a school shooting? Like, how quickly in that assessment were you like, oh my gosh, this could be a school shooting?
It was pretty quick once
Okay.
the client started talking, and I just kind of went with, okay, what are you thinking next? How do you see that working out? What do you think, what would you do with this? And it just unfolded. There was not a lot of needing to pry things out. And I think it was just because I was able to establish a lot of trust in the process up to that point. That was, okay, here's what I'm going to do, just kind of naturally came out at that moment.
Just popping in quickly to let you know that Thrizer is a payment app that gets you more private pay clients. Thrizer links with your client's health insurance and verifies how much their insurance covers for out-of-network therapy. When clients pay for sessions with Thrizer, they are only charged what they actually owe. Thrizer covers the rest of your fee and works with their insurance to get the reimbursement. That means that your clients can use Thrizer to save upfront with their out-of-network benefits when paying for your sessions, instead of submitting super bills and waiting for reimbursement.
Thrizer is a great way to collect payments from your clients. Like all payment processors, their credit card fee is 3%, which is the only fee you pay for using the platform. Thrizer is a mission-driven company that believes therapy should be accessible to everyone, and therapists should earn a good living. Their platform helps do just that. Clients only ever pay what they owe, while you continue to earn your full rate. Check out our special link, join.thrizer.com/modern therapist, and use the code Modern Therapists to activate $2,500 in free payments with Thrizer.
So I don't know the story, so I can't share information. So I'm going to kind of go based on my guesses on what happened as far as all of this, is that you would have to do the same thing you would do any other harm to others assessment, means, access, all of those different things. And my assumption, since you have framed it as stopping a school shooting, is that there wasn't access to a gun of some sort or a number of guns. You don't have to affirm any of this. And so it became about some practicalities of how do you actually create safety here in a way that makes sense. And we have an episode on defensive practices that speaks about what you may want to not do that we'll also link into the show notes. But I think, to me, I get to this place of, I can see folks immediately jumping to hospitalization. I can see folks immediately jumping to, I've even heard people like, give me the weapon. Like, there's different things where people go really astray here. And so whether you want to talk specifically or broadly about getting to the practicalities of it, that would be, I think, helpful for our audience, especially folks that are not as versed in risk and crisis as we are. And certainly we aren't even as good as all those risk assessment folks that you're talking about that do this on a daily basis. So you're in space, things are unfolding. How do you get to the practicalities of safety?
So the access to a weapon was not 0%.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that was immediately available, but it was not 0%. And just kind of getting through that space, one of the fortunate things of this particular situation is that I wrote down my feelings a couple of days after this happened, just to kind of process where I was at. And kind of going through some of these notes, it's just like, everybody did their job. Like, the kid talked, the kid allowed the parents to come in and out of the sessions, and the parents did their jobs in responding and in a really good way for the particular moments that things were in. And so it wasn't, just like, all right, who do we pass this off to in the immediacy to like intervene? And in fact, this is part of what ended up being so frustrating for me, is that everybody did their job. We were able to calm things down. And in California, this is still a Tarasov situation. This is still a reasonably identifiable victim or victims. And even though things in the moment are calmed down, there's still a responsibility to warn and protect in this situation. And so this is the part that just is so, I don't know, it's such an isolated, unique feeling that, all right, I've calmed everything down. Now I need to break the news to you that even though the immediacy of the threat is gone, we still have to get law enforcement involved.
Yeah, and just for folks not in California, Tarasov is our duty to warn.
And so then there's just kind of the very understandable like anger response from people in the room. It's just like,
Absolutely.
we got through this. We did what we were supposed to do, and now we need to go and talk with law enforcement about this. And
Yeah.
and just dealing with a lot of, anger, being blamed in that situation, that there's that immediate trust that was just established that, just kind of, ended up going away. And I feel very fortunate that everybody continued to do their job after that. Like the family cooperated, the LAPD and all of their, wonderful responses to things in the past. My understanding is that it was the right kind of touch from them in that situation and being able to talk with the family afterwards. So there's just a lot that, even though all of the right steps were done, it just was like, okay, we're doing our jobs here. We're taking this, we don't need to make this bigger than what it is. And now we've still got this responsibility here.
The responsibility with the duty to warn feels familiar to me in some of the interactions I've had around needing to do child abuse reporting with adult clients, so that they come clean, they start talking about stuff, they kind of commit to do better, but there has been child abuse that I have to report. And it just is like, okay, we've come to this trust, we've come to this place of connection, and it's a deeper connection because things are out in the open. There's been really deep conversations. It's been a crisis conversation. And then the therapist hat shifts to almost like the administrator hat of like, and these are my responsibilities. And now I can't consider you almost in what I have to do next, what my responsibilities are next. And there's huge repairs that potentially need to happen, but it feels like such a breach, I think, for the clients. And so to me, I'm thinking in this moment, session out of nowhere, deep connection, huge focus, big risk. There's this reaction of, whew, I've calmed it down. The relationship is there. And now I've got to be an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
And how isolating that is, because you can't even really talk to anybody about it.
Right.
Whew, that's hard.
Just going through my notes on this, my next session after that was pretending that the floor was lava.
With the client, you had the floor was like the next client that came in, you played the floor was lava.
I would love to say, it was like a 40-year-old like business executive. No, it was just like having to switch gears to like, here's the next space. Just going through some of my notes on this, like, all right, so next session, I'm in the play therapy room. I pretend that the floor is lava, pretend that the floor isn't lava. I'm doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
I consult. I'm told that I did the right thing. The news doesn't report on what didn't happen. Family messages me, kid isn't coming to the next day's session. In the 2 days afterwards, there's 3 more school shootings. The news that didn't happen because of my session would have been not even in the top 3 school shootings of the week.
Wow.
I'm assured that the kid is getting further treatment by the family. And I shared in consultation, I shared in, with people like Katie, people on my team, just, hey, this happened, a lot of people did a really good job of asking how I was doing, and I was fine. But it wasn't the question that I needed to be asked. And that's really kind of what I want this episode to be, is having that response plan for yourself
Yeah.
and or your team or the environment for when these situations happen. Because if you're a mental health provider and you're listening to this and you know that a colleague is going through something, we're very good at trying to get people to talk about how they're doing. And in kind of that critical sort of period immediately afterwards, I was fine. There was a plan for me to follow. That's why duty to warn exists.
Yeah.
It didn't make anything that much harder to go and do my next sessions. But there was just kind of this looming feeling that I needed to be asked, what are you going through? And I think that that's a very substantially different question than just how
Yeah.
are you doing?
I think it is. I think it is. I hadn't really thought about that in that way. I mean, to me, how are you doing is, I mean, it's a good question to ask, but it's also, we typically, how are you? Fine. Like we don't, as a society, honestly answer that question. And I think to me, from the outside as a colleague, I see you as someone who deals with risk and assessment and all of these things pretty commonly. And I think you're also someone who you can share your emotions. I've seen it. And, I think that that's not abnormal, but you also are like many therapists, but certainly probably like me as well. You overperform. And so I didn't realize, I said, how are you doing? Expecting an honest answer, but I didn't dig deeper because I didn't see anything of note. And I didn't realize you were going through it. And I think asking the other question, asking, what are you going through? What was that like for you? How are you taking that in? Using therapist skills
Right.
would have been helpful, because I just, it was one of those things, we get into the day-to-day grind, and I didn't see any of that. And I think that's the biggest issue, isn't it? Is that we don't, as therapists, we can put on our blank slate, even though we don't like it, we can put it on pretty easily. We can function and compartmentalize emotional content because we do it all the time. And so I didn't ask the question because I didn't realize I needed to, but thinking about it now, of course I needed to.
And that's really as much as I put in place, from my understanding of things, a trauma-informed workplace, that any of us are prone to these kinds of things. And having something to follow as a team, as a practice, even as an individual, that is in place for you when you go through these things, that makes it to where you acknowledge that trauma can happen. You acknowledge that this is not something that was planned for the day. This is not something that most people deal with in a normal situation, and that there is going to need to be something in place to take that into account before it even happens. Hey, modern therapists. If you work with developmental trauma and attachment wounds, we bet you're feeling isolated and super worn down right now. With the pandemic and the chaos in the world, it can be hard to find people who get it. That's why we're so excited to partner with our friend and fellow podcaster, Laura Reagan, LCSWC. She created the Trauma Therapist Network to provide support, community, and training designed just for relational trauma and attachment therapists. Meet weekly on Zoom for live calls for self-care, case consults, and training.
Registration is opening soon, so use our special affiliate link, bit.ly/Modern Trauma Therapist Network, to join the waitlist now. During early access, you'll be able to lock in the lowest pricing for your full membership. And when regular registration opens, if you use the code TTNSAVE20, you'll receive 20% off your first month. I wish we didn't have to take that into account, though. But the fact that just hit me so hard when you said that there was 3 more school shootings within the next week.
Within the next 2 days.
Oh my God. Yeah. So unfortunately, this is going to be relevant to more therapists than we want it to be.
Right. And the situation that I was working on didn't even happen. And
Yeah.
so, as we deal with just gun violence and stuff as a profession, there's even outside of the immediacy of the aftermath of these situations, it doesn't change what ends up happening to those who do our job. Like,
Yeah.
I get a gold star for doing my job, that something didn't happen. And here's really a big piece of it is the absolute lack of feeling like anything was resolved.
Mm-hmm.
In this situation, the client left my office. I got a couple of messages from parents afterwards updating me on placement and that kind of stuff afterwards. And it's still just like the work that we had been doing. And I work very personally with a lot of the clients that I have, but the work that ended up happening afterwards, it just feels like it was there and then it's unresolved and it's gone. And so there's not even processing back with the clients that, hey, here's what happened to us in this situation. There's no like, oh, we got through this and things turned out positively.
Yeah. I think it would be very, very hard for me to sit with that. How are you sitting with that, with the lack of resolution?
It was really hard for like the first week or so. And it's still hard. And like I said, this is again, date of recording is well over a month after this happened, and air date is going to be several months after that. So we're putting this out a little bit distantly from the event just to editorially give ourselves some opportunities with this. But
Yeah.
I mean, it still brings up a lot of feelings for me. Just going back and even looking through my personal notes about this situation, like there's a lot of still just kind of anger about the situation. Like I know that this law and this protocol is put in place for protection, and being on the other side of things ends up making it feel like, okay, the system in this case worked.
Yeah.
And somebody who in a very emotional space in their life had some feelings, made some communications that still ended up drastically altering their life based on who they were talking to and allowing the system to catch them where they were at. And it's something where, if I, put this in, all right, I'm going to go and teach law and ethics students about, duty to warn and duty to protect sort of things. Being removed from those situations, all of that is really, yes, those things should be put in place. When you know the people intimately,
Yeah.
and you're the one responsible for it, that is a feeling that as I'm sitting here, it's just like I feel so compassionate for where this particular kid was, and theoretically where they still are as I'm talking about it ends up just kind of making it so surreal. Like I can go and talk about, court cases that happened 50 years ago that led to this protocol being in place. And it's just kind of like, yes, that is what happened. But to have it really in front of you, and especially the first time, like I hope that nobody gets really good at this feeling,
Yeah.
but it's something that just is, oh, I don't know who else to really connect of like, oh, you've also gone through this experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I asked this before we recorded, and I think the question I have that I think is important to kind of touch base on a little bit is I've made calls on my clients around child abuse, like I mentioned earlier, and it has drastically changed their lives, and it even, all of the pieces, but the way you're describing it feels different. And so can you quantify kind of the difference of reporting child abuse on a family versus stopping a school shooting?
The part that I haven't talked about is calling the school.
Mm.
The duty to
To
warn.
warn the identified
Yeah.
victim.
Hey, I'm a mandated reporter. This is not what a school is used to hearing, maybe about child abuse sorts of things. This isn't that.
Yeah.
That this threat was made, I mean, I'm just kind of throwing my hands up here. I know nobody can see this, but it was just kind of like, there's what I wrote down to just be like, hey, school, here is the information that I am telling you. I know, that the kid isn't supposed to be going to school today based on what parents had told me. But just so you know, good luck with how you communicate that to your staff. And I'm a resource. Bye.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean,
Yeah. So that's a hard call to make.
and just, I've supervised people before who've had to make, terrorist off calls to like law enforcement where they've had to like teach law enforcement, like, all right, here's what your job is in this situation where you're supposed to intervene. But it's that call to the intended victim or victims that's just like, you don't know me. I know this is a shocking phone call. There's probably feelings that you're supposed to have. I'm not your therapist, but I
Yeah.
also don't want to leave a lot of loose feelings on this.
Yeah.
It was definitely a call that, I did let them know that law enforcement had already been told that there had been intervention that ended up happening. And, so there was just kind of like, all right, I'm ruining somebody else's day because you start off a school day getting a call and like,
Mhm.
okay, this is sitting in the background and now somebody else is just on edge.
Yeah.
At the time of recording, I'm still working through what my practice's protocol is going to be on this because it's not just me who works on my team, but by the air date of this episode, there's going to be something as far as a policy in place for my practice that is something I'm happy to share. Like, I don't want anybody else to go through this, and I'm consulting with some people to have what is best practices when it comes to kind of these incidents and being able to have kind of some internal structures to do this. So we'll be happy to share that in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. And really just if you are somebody who's going through this, hey, thank you, first of all, for doing your job, but also just really being compassionate to yourself and knowing like, oh, even though I might be fine, there's just something that I need to talk about in a way that isn't just business as usual. We've all had tough sessions. We've all, done our best to turn around and go show up for the next client, but there really is something deeper than, hey, I'm having a reaction to this. It's being able to process that on a deeper level. So take care of yourselves and hopefully have something in place before you need it.
So my takeaways are make sure that you're really versed in risk assessment, what your responsibilities are, and all of that, because you might be able to do the same thing and stop a school shooting. And there may be a whole other episode that we can do on duty to warn, risk to others, or harm to others assessments, because I think there's some of this stuff in here that I wasn't totally familiar with. So we may want to do another episode on that. But additionally, it's recognizing the impact on yourself and how you can get support. And you're talking about like you're going to put policies in place. I could also see kind of questions to ask or things that could be kind of what do you need to be processing through. And so yeah, we'll have that ready before we put this out, and we can put that into our show notes or on our website or whatever, so that you can grab those things and have some trauma informed processing for something like this.
So once again, our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media, join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue the conversation about this kind of stuff and about our episodes. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy.
Remember to check out Thrizer for a new way to attract and retain cash pay clients. It's a win-win concept that makes out-of-network therapy more accessible while you earn your full rate.
Visit join.thrizer.com/modern therapist for more information and to get set up in minutes. And use the code Modern Therapists for $2,500 in free payments on Thrizer. Just a quick reminder, registration for the Trauma Therapist Network is opening soon. Get the best pricing you can by joining the waitlist now.
Go to bit.ly/Modern Trauma Therapist Network to learn more.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.